Hey guys, thanks for joining me again for just a brief look at our newest project, color constancy or color relativity. The word constancy, of course, here is elusive, right? We think of colors being constant. We think that our car is always the same color blue, our shirt is always the same color red, but actually we're coming to realize just how relative, how easily influenced color is by its lighting, the colors surrounding it, the proportion, etc. And we want to not only understand that it is relative, but really be fairly able to predict how color will change given its a change in its scenario, so that you can really be in control of the color you're using as artists and designers. One group of artists who really understood and were great students of the relativity of color were the Impressionists, and probably none more than Claude Monet. So these are French painters, for the most part, working in and around Paris in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And Claude Monet in particular was really devoted to what we might call optical realism. So being realistic about how he perceived color. And when you look at these paintings, you might not call them realistic in the sense that they have a lot of texture, they're not kind of smooth and refined. But he really is trying to not use subjective color. He's not trying to paint his emotions here. He's really trying to capture what he believes he sees in the color on this building as the light falls across it in different seasons and different weather circumstances. So in this first one that I'm showing you of Rome Cathedral, you can get a sense that maybe the sun is just coming up over the trees. And so there's the warm sunlight on the top half of the building and just icy cold blues and blue violets, even a little bit of red violets down there in the lower part that might be like a shadow cast by other buildings or trees. Here in a second one, you've got really low light. So there's just a sense of maybe the light shining up here and casting a shadow of one tower onto this tower. But the whole facade is mostly in shadow. And then even in the recesses here, you interestingly find like a red or kind of warm tones into the recesses, which is probably pretty unexpected. We usually think of cool colors sitting back and warm colors sitting forward. So sometimes they found unexpected results by really being great students of color in its own kind of native habitat, right? Here's another great one. In this case, can you guys see what's happening with the light now? You've got a sense that now there's bright sunlight hitting the face of the building, creating these really kind of emphatic, dark shadows. Of course, the shadows are made by him, changing his value set. So he gives us these great like 9s, 8s, 7s in these shadows that really play off of the highlights that are maybe in like the 2s to 4s. So you've got this sense of kind of a bright midday light raking across the facade. And just one last one. What would you say about the time of day or the season here? It's such a chilly, cold blue, and the way that the tower almost disintegrates into the white of the background, it feels like it's probably a winter morning, maybe a little frosty, maybe a little hazy out. And just capturing this building at this really, really cold moment. But it's so fascinating to see how many different times he came back that he thought it was worth coming back 40 different times or more to capture this one building in all these different lighting situations, atmospheric, winter, summer, spring, fall, all these different situations to capture how the light was affected. Another person by whom we're actually really influenced, even if you haven't heard his name before, is Johannes Itten, and he wrote a really important book called The Art of Color. And in fact, some of our smaller color exercises come from his book and his understanding of color. So he was one that recommended these kind of studies that we've been doing, where you're looking at the same, in this case, the same gray on two different backgrounds, or in this case, the same kind of yellow-orange on two different backgrounds, and seeing that the background color has a huge effect on the foreground color, right, on that smaller cube in the center. And in each of these 4 pairs, they're actually the same color being used in each one. Here between the pairs, the same blue, the same green here, the same yellow-green, and the same kind of mauve color here. And again, we want to really be able to understand not just that it happens, but why does it happen? Why do the colors react the way they do? So keeping in mind our hue, value, and saturation, we can expect that the background color, especially if it's larger in proportion than the foreground color, that this background is going to create an opposite effect of itself. So this deep blue is going to project kind of an orange, or at least a warm tone, onto its foreground color. Because it's darker, it's going to make the blue look lighter by comparison. And then in saturation, this is so saturated, this actually looks a little less saturated by comparison. So we want to really be masters of that idea of how those phenomenon work. Now you remember after image and simultaneous contrast, and we looked at these in sort of abstract diagrams like this one, where if we stare at the yellow circles and then look to the white ground, we begin to see kind of violet circles. But we also want to understand it not just sort of in the abstract, like in these diagrams, but also we want to know how it's going to apply to our works of art and design. One other effect that we hadn't introduced before is called the Bezold effect. And the Bezold effect takes note of how color works in patterning. So when we look at patterns like this on the left, and then we look to the right, they almost seem like pretty different patterns just by switching out one of the main colors. So on the right, they've replaced the yellow with black. And it really has a different emotional feel, a different sense of warmth or coolness, a different spatial feel to it. Or the same in this second example. Which means that if you're dealing with, especially for you, design majors, that you can use a similar image or the same exact pattern, but just by changing out one color, you can really renew it and make it feel like almost an entirely different composition. So you've got some options there, with even if you have minimal resources. Now, our minor problems that we've already gotten a good start on, you had two squares that were the same color, and you were trying to make that one color look like two by placing them on different grounds. You were trying to make two different colors look like one by the colors that you put them on. And then lastly, make three look like two. So you had the two squares with a thin strip of a third color going across it. And the third color was intended to look like each of its parents, so to speak, as it crossed the middle ground. We also are going to do color research, which is what we're going to do tomorrow in class. We're going to look at specifically, you can choose any of the works of Monet that are 4 works on the same subject. So it could be 4 of his Haystack or Grain Stack series. It could be 4 of the Rouen Cathedral series, etc. You just want to be able to kind of stand on his shoulders and learn from this great master of color. So you'll follow all the regular guidelines of our color research that we've been doing all semester, putting them in rainbow order, marking their proportional amount, how much red to blue, etc. And since you guys know we're getting a little bit low on our color paper, if you can't find the exact color that you need, you'll just mix it with your paint, or you're welcome to do it entirely with your paint rather than use the color paper at all. Either way is fine. And there's a good example. Lastly, I wanted to talk about the major problem and show you some other student examples so you can kind of get in your mind's eye what this project might look like. You're again choosing one object to be the focus of your study, and you're going to photograph that object in 2 significantly different situations, so different lighting, backgrounds, surrounding environments, times of day, etc. Print those photographs in color and bring those to class. And with those, you're going to actually cut and collage a new composition, making one composition out of the 2 photographs. You'll create one painted image that's about 6 by 8 inches or larger. If you want to go larger, you can always go bigger. As you paint, pay close attention to the changes in color that are captured in your new hybrid composition. You may choose to use the grid method, try a posterized style, or paint a representational image blending the color. The focus here is your ability to mix paint and match the color of the original images into a pleasing composition. So both, kind of testing, again, our ability to mix and match color as they are shown in the photograph, so really capturing how does the object change from one lighting to the other. But also, equally important is to think about how pleasing or interesting, how meaningful is your composition. Okay, so always trying to treat ourselves like artists and designers already. Just a few examples to show you what these can look like. This is a relatively simple one where the student photographed a book laying on a chair, and with, I think in the room, the light on and then the light off. And so this is the two photographs that she made into one composition, and this is her painting of the two. So very simple, can be a very simple idea of meeting them in half. Here the student photographed this red cup sitting on the window edge, looking out the window at two different, like sort of in bright sunlight and then in an overcast. And instead of marrying the compositions in half, he gave us a circle from one composition in the center, which definitely creates a really important focal point. And then he gave us this external ring of the more sunny day, right? Here, a similar circular motif, but many different circles. So the object in this case, quote unquote, was this truck, but also pretty challenging as a form because, of course, the metal is very reflective. So on the more overcast day, the windshield and hood looked really almost white. And then on the more a sunny day, you could see the vivid red of the truck here and there, the vivid green of the grass. This one I thought was really interesting. It was a small horse figurine made out of, it was plastic, but it was intended to look like jade, like an Asian stone. And here she photographed it on the left on grass, which brought out these really cool blues, and then on the right on sidewalk. So it was a more neutral background, which showed more of the true green of the object. But there's something interesting about cutting this figurine in half, something about sort of the way we think of animals and even humans now as something that we can sort of doctor with, that we use plastic surgery or we alter ourselves in so many different ways, even if, just with makeup. But there's something interesting about this kind of hybrid animal being created in this composition. So I think there's kind of an interest there beyond just the project. This one too, a relatively simple still life, but the way that she cut her two images into strips and gave us these kind of stripes. So the first, third, fifth came from the same composition. The second, fourth, sixth came from the same composition. And it almost feels like you're looking at maybe shadow cast by blinds across an object. It's subtle, but still pretty dynamic as an image. And it's also interesting to have kind of a rectilinear structure forced on top of this organic object. And then lastly, I think this one is both sort of humorous and a little creepy. It's a student wearing this sort of costume box on his head, and took the photos at midday and then in the late night where it was already dark. And in this case, the student also chose to posterize the image, which is an effect you can get on Photoshop and I believe Instagram. So it just kind of simplified some of the shapes for him because he was not very practiced at art or at painting and blending things in subtle ways. So it gave him some more kind of secure shapes to hold on to, but not doing the grid method again, right? And this image, I think, again, is really strangely compelling. It feels very silly at first, but then there's also this kind of strange eeriness about being confronted by this half person, half monster. So that's the direction we're heading. The schedule looks like this. Tomorrow, on Tuesday, we're doing the color research on the constancy of Impressionist work. And you may have already taken your photographs and be ready to start on your major project, which would be great because you'd get ahead before Thursday and before we go into spring break. If not, definitely have quality photographs taken and printed. Come into class with them on Thursday the 27th, and you'll be able to begin your collage and your final painting. We do have spring break coming up, hooray, and then we'll have 2 more classes on this major project, okay? And then after this, we should have time for 2 more projects in our semester, so we'll have 6 altogether. All right, guys, thanks for joining me here, and I will see you tomorrow.